Working is one thing, working diligently is another. One of the things I noticed as I was meticulously going through the book of Proverbs is that it talks about work in some passages, but then there are passages that talk about being diligent. So I scratched my head and said, well, what's the difference? Well, obviously there is a difference, but what does the book of Proverbs say is the difference? What is a diligent person like? And what happens when you are diligent? It seems to me that the verses in Proverbs on diligence answers those two questions. What's the diligent person like? And what happens when you are that kind of person? Now, that's not exactly the outline I'm going to follow. I'm going to use a different one that lays out the answer to those two basic questions. So with that in mind, let's look at Proverbs 21, verse 5. Proverbs 21, verse 5. It says, "The plans of the diligent lead surely to plenty, but those of everyone who is hasty surely to poverty." Interesting verse, obviously. There is a contrast here between the diligent and those who do work hastily. So what is the difference? What is this verse really saying? Well, let's start with the little fact that it talks about the plans of the diligent. The plans, that Hebrew word, means to give thought to something, to devise something. The basic word means to plan. So the first thing I think Proverbs teaches us is that the diligent person plans their work. That is a critical part of what a diligent person does. Now, this verse says that as a result of that, it leads surely to plenty. So the point is that if you are a diligent person that plans your work, then that will lead to plenty. Now the contrast is, if you do it hastily, you don't plan, you don't think through your work, then it's going to lead to poverty. So the contrast in this verse is between the diligent and the hasty, and the plenty and the poverty. Those who are hasty aren't careful planners. They do not succeed. Their diligent plan, they don't diligently plan, and consequently, they don't end up with plenty, they end up with poverty. Now, I think the point that we should glean from this passage is that diligent people plan. It says, the plans of the diligent. You need to plan your work. And that leads to success, or in the case of this verse, plenty. And if you don't diligently plan, it'll lead to not being successful or poverty. I learned this lesson in college. I have mentioned before that I did not grow up in a Christian home. I became a Christian my last year in high school, just 2 months before I graduated. And so I was all excited about the Lord and about leading people to Christ and preaching. And in that frame of mind, I went to a Christian college. Frankly, I was more interested in preaching than studying. And guess what I did? I preached. Guess what I didn't do? I didn't study much. And then came the finals. I will not forget that first experience with finals. I hadn't studied all semester. I wasn't prepared to take those finals. So, as I suppose thousands of freshmen and millions before me have done, I burned the midnight oil. I stayed up all night. Now, as I recall, I think I managed to pass that exam exhausted. And from that, I learned a lesson. This is not the way to go. So, and I often tell this to students. As a matter of fact, when somebody graduates from high school and they're about to enter college, I very often sit them down and give them this little lecture. And the lecture goes like this. This is what I did. The next semester, I took a calendar for the semester. And the first thing I did is I put in all the classes I had. Now, back in those days, I don't know if this is still true, there was an unwritten rule that you should spend 2 hours out of class for every hour in class. Nobody did it, but that was the rule. So what I did is I then went through the calendar and I marked off 2 hours per class hour. And then I had the whole schedule laid out. Now, the other thing I did, and I thought this was key to the plan, is every afternoon I marked off several hours and I called it goof-off time. So that if I, being the gregarious people person that I am, if during the morning hours when I was supposed to be in the library studying, I was at the snack shop having a snack and talking, I would then force myself to take an hour off my goof-off time to make up for the hour that I was supposed to be studying. Now, that plan served me well. Got me through college, got me through seminary, and frankly, the basic idea of planning your work has gotten me through the rest of my life. As you know, my great passion is to teach the book. Well, that takes a little planning. So I have planned my life around time to do that. And that's been consistent throughout my entire life. So this is a very critical part of getting something done. Plan your work. Now, most people, frankly, don't have much of a plan. The most they have is a plan for next weekend, or maybe vacation, and they don't have a plan much beyond that. But if you are serious about getting something done, whatever that something is, then what you need to do is plan it. Diligent people who are successful, who end up with plenty, plan their work. To have a plan, you need a plan. The second thing I think the book of Proverbs says about being diligent is in chapter 12, verse 27. This is real interesting. Look at Proverbs 12:27. It says, "The lazy man does not roast what he took in hunting, but the diligent is man's precious possession." That's an interesting proverb. Now, we're going to talk about the lazy person down the road here in the study of the book of Proverbs. But this verse is saying that the lazy man goes hunting, kills a wild animal of some kind, and doesn't bother to cook it. The lazy doesn't roast what he gets in hunting. So, in contrast to that, the diligent man's is his precious possession. That is, he values what he works for. The lazy man went out hunting, he worked for it, but he didn't value it enough to cook it. Whereas the diligent man, it's a precious possession to him. And the idea, I think, behind this is that he values what he works for. What is gotten by diligence is of value to that person. Or to say it another way, what you don't work for, you don't value. If you just get it without working, it is of no great value to you. Now, I stumbled upon a story that just says that oh so very well. There is a fella I'd never heard of until I dug up this story named Ramit Singh. He is obviously an Asian fella, but if you see him on YouTube, he's very American. So he's probably second generation. At any rate, he's a financial advisor, an entrepreneur, and an author. What he's done, he wrote one New York bestseller entitled, "I Will Teach You to Be Rich." So he's written a bunch of materials. He has courses on how to be rich. Then he wrote an article about what happened. And it's that article that is a great illustration of this verse. He says this. When my business first started and doing well, my friends would say to me, "Ramit, can you give me a course for free?" I would always say yes. I was raised in a culture where you helped everyone you could for free, and you didn't expect anything in return. If you're a college guidance counselor, that means you're looking at all your nieces and nephews' college admission essays. If you're a doctor, it means that you count on your aunt dropping off her x-ray for a second opinion. And if you sell information products, it means that you give them access, no questions asked. I never minded giving them access. I wasn't concerned about capturing all the revenue. Plus, it didn't really cost me anything to add another name to the address list. So why not? But I could always track to see who logged on. Can you guess if they did or did not? The answer is, of course not. People value what they pay for. That sounds so obvious, but I didn't internalize that until it happened over and over again. I gave them a $2,000 course for free. They didn't even log in once. After a while, I started to feel a little resentful. This is my business. This is what I do, and they don't even take me seriously. I tried to find creative ways to get them to put some skin in the game. It was important to me that they didn't think I was greedy, that it was all about money. But I also wanted them to take it seriously. I tried to get them to donate 50% of the sale price to charity. That's a creative idea. I'd give them, and then I'd give them the course. As you can imagine, that was a disaster. Finally, I gave up. Whenever someone asked me for a free program, I said, look, I want to give you this material. I know it can help you. It's not about the money, but in my experience, people who don't pay just don't value it. I said, this is my livelihood. This is what I do for a living, and I'm really good at it. So if you're interested, I'd be happy to open up a slot in this course. It's closed right now, but I'll open it up just for you. But I would have to ask you to pay the full price just like everybody else. And what do you think happened? Most of the people who wanted it for free went away. But the people who said, okay, I'll do it, they looked up every single lesson in the course. And that changed everything. Remember, People value what they work for. On that same website, another person said, I can tell you from our own data that all people get our free emails. The people who actually buy the product are 5 times more likely to open it than those who never bought. Think about that. On the many of my paid list, I have an open rate of 100%. That means they open every email more than once, whereas the typical email open rate on a typical night might be something like 15 to 18%. It's a stark difference. Understand that people value what they pay for. You're not doing them a disservice by charging them. You're actually doing a profound service for people who want to take action. Is that interesting? Is that true? Boy, I'd like to talk about this for the next hour or two. I think there's some things going on in our society where we give too many people free stuff. And I don't think we're helping them at all. Now, I'm all for helping people. We have a benevolence fund we call the Deacons Fund, and we've helped I don't know how many people since I've been the pastor of church. If there's a genuine need, then we do it, no questions asked. But I think sometimes we're not doing them a service by giving them something free. I don't think I've ever said this publicly, and I'm not sure I should do it now, but can I get personal? A number of years ago, I got into a conversation with some other pastors, and we talked about the fact that we counsel people that are in trouble, their marriage is in trouble, and we sit down and try to help them. And we both decided, we were talking about this, we both observed they didn't do what we told them. And then we stumbled upon this principle and said, maybe the problem is we charge, or we don't charge. And then we then sat around and said, well, maybe what we ought to do is say this. It's $100 an hour. I think the going rate, I know of one professional that charges $150, so we'll charge $100. Back in those days, I don't think it was that high, but we came up with a figure. And then we said, we'll give it all to missions. Now, as a pastor, I've never charged anybody a dime from that point till this, ever, and don't intend to start. But the conversation really got my attention, thinking maybe they don't have any skin in the game, so they don't take my advice. I had a case like that in the last year that was just outstanding. I spent hours with a fella, and he would not do the simplest thing I told him. And finally, I sat him down. I don't think I've ever done this, not like I did him. And I sat him down, and I just said, look, I've been studying the book of Proverbs, and according to the book of Proverbs, you, sir, are a fool. Now, I had biblical basis for that. I didn't say it with that kind of attitude, but I never saw him again. Now, I just think there's some real truth to this. But where this really came home to me is I've written a number of books. Now, in bygone days, I've had them published by some publishers, and one of them did exceedingly well. It was even used as a textbook for years in some Christian schools. I wrote a book on evangelism, and it eventually went out of print. I think it sold 25,000 copies. That was years and years ago. I've written some other things. Another book I wrote went out of print. There's a third that another publisher has written, and it's on the internet. I just got a royalty check, and I think it was for $200 for the year or the 6 months or whatever. So I'm not making a lot of money out of this. So then I decided there were some things I wanted to write, and I would just pay to have it done. So if you go to Amazon, I think there's 5 books up there. So what I've done is I've put the books that are out of print up there in evangelism and lordship, salvation, and that sort of thing. There's one on repentance that a publisher controls. That's the one I just mentioned. And then I've put up several others. I've spent my adult life studying the subject of the spiritual life, and I've written a book on it. The thing we used to call the app class went through it. I did a series of sermons. Well, it's on Amazon. I got a royalty check from that outfit. I think I made $2.36. Now, I don't care. I'm not doing this to make money. Matter of fact, I put it on Amazon so that I wouldn't have to fool with it, because before I did Amazon, I went and had it printed, and then when people did order it, it was on my website, I'd have to go to the post office and mail it. And that was just a little bit of an aggravation. It was time consuming. I didn't like that process. So I put it on Amazon at quite an expense, just so I could order it and give it away. Now, I told you all of that to say this. When I give books to people, in my experience, most of them never read it. Now, I haven't stopped that practice, and I don't intend to. However, I just think if they bought it and they had skin in the game, they might be more interested in reading. I've done the same thing with material. Matter of fact, I put a ton of material on a thumb drive recently, and I gave it to some select people. And some of them have taken off. They can't get enough of it. And some of them have never read or listened to the first thing on that. And it was all free. You know, I paid for the whole thing. Didn't matter to me. I wanted people to have the material. But I am really convinced that if you don't put forth some effort and it costs you, you're not going to value it. There's a verse that says, the things that you've heard of me among faithful witnesses, commit thou to, you know the next verse, next word? Faithful men who will be able to teach others also. So when I look for somebody to really work with, what I look for is somebody who's diligent, faithful. And one of the ways I test them, I'm telling secrets I've never said before out loud. And one of the ways I do that is I'll give them something to read, not say a thing about it, and then say, oh, by the way, 6 months later, did you? And they say no, and I'll go find somebody that is a faithful person to work. Am I making sense? Does that make sense? If you're really interested in knowing the Bible, if you're really interested, let me know, because I got material that can take you a long way down that road. But it's going to cost you. I'm not going to charge you for it, but it's going to cost you time and discipline and diligence. And if you don't value that, it will never get done. So one of the great lessons in Proverbs about a diligent person is that they will end up successful with plenty. And the lazy that won't even roast what he found in the hunt will end up in poverty. There is more to this. There are proverbs that talk about other things that the diligent person does. I want you to turn to Proverbs 10:4. Proverbs 10:4. Now, I've already quoted or looked at 21:5, which says, the plans of the diligent lead to plenty. 10:4 says something similar. He who has a slack hand becomes poor, but the hand of the diligent makes rich. Now, a minute ago, when I spoke about 21:5, I spent my time talking about the diligent people have a plan. But that verse says, and it leads to plenty. I didn't camp on that, but now in 10:4, it says the same thing. The hand of the diligent makes rich. So let's talk about a third thing we know about diligent people. They have a plan, they value what they work for, and they end up rich. That's what that verse says. It makes them rich. The slack become poor. If you don't work diligently, you end up in poverty. But if you work and you're diligent and you plan, then you end up rich. Lazy people become poor people. Someone has said the hands of a lazy person are empty, and so are their pockets. Another, no one becomes the man of the hour by watching the clock. The diligent hand, that is the one that engages in hard work, makes the owner rich. The hands that are full of work belong to people whose wallets are filled with money. The way to wealth is not wishing, the way to wealth is work. Or look at Proverbs 13:4. Says the same thing. The soul of the lazy man desires and has nothing, but the soul of the diligent shall be made rich. Oh boy, does this one hit the button. The lazy desire. They have a desire. And this is where I got fooled so many times. That people had a desire for spiritual things, but they had no diligence, no discipline. They were not faithful individuals, and so it never produced anything. They did what they wanted to do rather than get a plan and stick with it. So you can have a desire and end up with nothing. That's because you're lazy. Desire is not enough. There's an old adage that says, if wishes were horses, beggars would ride. It's not wishes, it's work that does the job. Another is said, to expect the blessings without diligence is delusion. Simply put, the desires of the lazy are not satisfied because they're not willing to work. He would be wise without study, and the lazy person, is the one who would be wise without study and rich without labor. On the other hand, those who are diligent end up rich. Work is the key to wealth, the industrious gain, and that richly. The slothful have nothing but wishes. Now, I suppose that there are lots of people that illustrate this, but I found one story that just sort of grabbed my attention. A lady wrote an article and said, you don't have to be born with a silver spoon in your mouth to achieve great things in life. Many of today's billionaires had very humble beginnings. Growing up poor didn't stop them. CEOs, celebrities, business experts from reaching the pinnacle of success. And it shouldn't stop you either. Then she told this story. She told about a girl born to a teenage single mother in Mississippi. Growing up, she did not have running water or electricity. What she did do was focus on school and work. She started out in radio and ended up with a TV program in Baltimore called People Are Listening. Later, that program changed its name and became a national syndicated radio program in 1986. That woman who grew up in poverty in Mississippi, by the age of 49, according to Forbes magazine, her estimated worth was $3.1 billion. That's billion with a B, not million with an M. Imagine, that's a rags to riches story if I ever heard it. By the way, her name is Oprah Winfrey. In 2001, she said on one of her own shows, quote, "The whole idea, I think, of having wealth is not letting wealth use you, but you use it. Being a person who came from an outhouse and very poor circumstances, I can assure you that the more money you get, it really doesn't change you unless you are the kind of person who is defined by money." Now that's the article I read about her. I saw somewhere else years ago that she was hardworking, obviously, but she also did something else. She made some very wise financial decisions. So she was diligent and wise, which are what these Proverbs are telling us. This is in the book of wisdom. Wise people do this. That she not only handled work well, she handled money wisely. I mean, we've all heard the stories of celebrities who made millions and millions of dollars and ended up bankrupt. I saw a story like that recently. Why? Because they weren't wise with their money. They worked hard, they were diligent in that department, but not wise in handling money. A diligent person does both, and they end up rich. So, we've only seen three things so far. A diligent person plans, they value what they get, and they end up rich. Now, this is a proverb, and as you've heard me say, these are not absolute laws. There are exceptions, and some work and don't end up rich for one reason or another. All kinds of other things can happen. But as a proverb, that is true. It's certainly true versus someone who is lazy. I have one other thing to say. In the book of Proverbs, it says a fourth thing about diligent people. Look at chapter 12, verse 24. Chapter 12, verse 24. The hand of the diligent will rule, but the lazy man will be put to forced labor. All right. The diligent man will rule. Now this is probably, in the ancient world, perhaps a reference to the fact that when one nation conquered another, the conquered ruled those who had been conquered. The conquered served the conqueror. However, I think it goes way beyond that. I think that, as one commentator has pointed out, the diligent rise to a position of leadership. They become successful, and it's because they are diligent they will rule in their field. No man, William Penn said, is fit to command another who cannot command himself. They have the diligence, the discipline, and the self-control to plan what they want to do and then follow it. And when they do, when they work diligently, they become a leader in their field. Let me give you a couple of examples. There was a fellow you probably never heard of named Adam Clark. he did something very few people have done. He wrote a commentary on the whole Bible. He was a Methodist fellow. Adam Clarke is reported to have spent 40 years writing his commentary on the Scripture. Now that's diligence. 40 years. Noah Webster labored 36 years forming his dictionary. In fact, he crossed the ocean twice to gather material needed to make the book absolutely accurate. Milton rose at 4 o'clock every morning in order to have sufficient hours to compose and rewrite his poetry, which stands among the best in the world's literature. Gibbon spent 26 years on the book The Decline and Fall of the Roman Empire, but it towers as a monument to careful research and untiring dedication to his task. Bryan wrote one of his poetic masterpieces 100 times before publication, just to attain complete beauty and perfection of expression. These men, it is said, enjoyed what they were doing, and each one threw all of his energy into the effort, no matter how difficult the job. Do you have a plan? Maybe I should start by asking, do you have a goal? Is there something you would like to do? Do you have a bucket list? Is that the expression these days? Do you have something, a person you'd like to become? I'm tempted to say, do you really want to become Christ-like? Do you really want to grow to spiritual maturity? Did you ever read what Jesus said about that? He said, before you do it, count the cost. Now, going to heaven is free. The Bible describes that as a gift. It plainly says, the gift of God is eternal life. Jesus paid for that when he died on the cross and arose from the dead. So all you have to get that is trust him for it. You want to become Christ-like? You want to become a godly person? You want to become spiritually mature? According to Jesus, don't do that until you think about it and you count the cost. That's going to take a faithful person, a diligent person, a disciplined person. We call them disciples. They are learners. They apply themselves. And they are the ones that become leaders spiritually. So to sum up what I've said, because diligent people plan and value what they work, and they work for it, they end up leaders in their field, and they end up rich. Let me boil all this down to one simple slogan. You need to plan your work and work your plan. Now that's what you need to write down, not on paper, but on that little brain you've got. You need to plan your work and work your plan. Now, I want to conclude by looking at another proverb. I've already looked at, Proverbs 10:4. He who has a slack hand becomes poor, but the hand of the diligent makes rich. I want to add to that Proverbs 10:5. We've looked at 10:4, look at 10:5. He who gathers in summer is a wise son. He who sleeps in harvest is a son who causes shame. Interesting. In other words, verse 4 is talking about a diligent person, and it says they end up rich. Verse 5 talks about a diligent person and says they are wise. And if you don't do this, you end up in shame. Look at what it says in verse 5. of chapter 10. He who gathers in summer is wise. Well, back in the ancient world, where an agricultural people lived by the harvest, then the harvest was very important. As a matter of fact, to sleep during the harvest in the ancient world was the most extreme form of laziness. And what this proverb is saying is sloth brings shame. Anybody who would be lazy during the harvest would bring shame to himself and probably to his family. But a wise son knows that when it's harvest time, you pull out all the stops and do work from dawn till dusk to get the crop in. So, I want to end by saying this is really wise. It's not just beneficial, it's wise. Want to be a wise person? Plan your work and work your plan. How are we doing? Got it? I want to know, have I triggered something in your thinking that makes you, after this, tonight, go home and think, I need to plan? Has that occurred to you? Has it occurred to you? Something you want to plan? Shall we sing a hymn and ask you to come forward? Really? You should have a plan. You should work it. I think you should have a spiritual plan and work it. Have a prayer time. Have a time to study the scriptures. Know what you're studying. If you need some help, come see me. I got plenty of suggestions. I mean, I can keep you busy for years, and I'm not joking. Some of you know what I'm talking about. But you're going to have to do it. And it takes a wise person to do it. Don't be stupid and waste your life doing just what you want to do and what is enjoyable. Get a plan and work your plan. There's one more thing I've got to say, and it doesn't have to do with the book of Proverbs. Remember, I've said a couple of times that, as a matter of fact, I said it recently. You might have noticed me doing it without saying it. That you need to look at Proverbs, and then you need to ask, how does that fit in the rest of the Bible? You've heard me say that? One of the keys to Bible study is to look at that subject in light of all of Scripture. So, I want to look at this in terms of the New Testament. I want you to turn to James chapter 5. Now, the question is, does James, or does the New Testament for that matter, talk about planning, and what does it say about it? Well, that's why I'm taking you to this passage. By the way, there are verses in the New Testament where it talks about Paul had a plan. He told, when he wrote the book of Romans, he said, I want to come there so you can help me go on to Spain. There's no record in the New Testament, or for that matter, outside the New Testament, that he ever made it to Spain, as far as we know. But he had a plan. He wanted to go to Spain, and he probably did. Knowing Paul, he probably made it. Well, James adds another dimension to this that I think we need to note. So look at James chapter 4, verse 13. Come now, you who say, today or tomorrow we will go to such and such a city and spend a year there and buy and sell and make profit. Now let me pause here for a second. If you read that verse, it all sounds very general. You're going to do this and that. But this is very, very specific. This is a detailed plan. Either today or tomorrow, the plan has a time. We will go to such and such a city. That isn't vague, that's a specific city. So we've got a specific time to go to a specific place. And we're going to spend a year there. So it's got a start time and an end time. And when we get there, what we're going to do is buy low and sell high so we can make a profit. That what that verse says? I'm going to write across that verse, plan. Got it? James is saying it's okay to have a plan. Then he says this, whereas you do not know what will happen tomorrow, for what is your life? It is even a vapor that appears for a little time and then vanishes away. Instead, you ought to say, if the Lord wills, we shall live and do this or that. Now note that verse very carefully. He's still talking about having a plan. We will do this or that. That's not wrong. Have all the plans you want. You should have a plan. But, as I said recently from the book of Ecclesiastes, life is unpredictable. You don't know. So the one element you need to add to all of this is we will do it if the Lord wills. So, Paul said that about going to Spain. Lord willing, we would say. So, include the Lord. Make your plans, work your plan, and along the way, acknowledge the Lord. All right, but if you plan your work and work your plan, won't it work? Yeah, it will. I mean, even if you didn't acknowledge the Lord, wouldn't it work? Yeah, it might. Work works. Right? But there's another problem. Keep reading. But now you boast in your arrogance. All such boasting is evil. For a believer to plan work and work the plan thinking I'm going to be successful without the Lord is evil. He ends by saying, therefore, to him that knows to do good, and in this passage doing good is making a plan and leaving the Lord out of your life in the process. To him that has a plan and does not include the Lord, to him it is sin. So to do what I'm telling you to do and not include the Lord is called evil, and it's called sin. So James would say, plan your work. Be diligent in your work, and remember the Lord. To do the first two of those things and not the second is sin. Father, thank you for giving us the opportunity to make plans. To make plans and to work them. Thank you for giving us the opportunity to be diligent about your work and serving you. And Lord, thank you for this reminder that we often work and leave you out. As you told the slaves in Colossians, whatever you do, do it heartily to the Lord. Father, thank you for this reminder of that. In Jesus' name, amen.